Hi, welcome to the Pinoy RN, a podcast that provides insight into a variety of subjects relevant to Pinoy nurses. Here's your host, Jerome Babate.
For me, I'm a second generation Filipino-American. My mom she was a nurse that migrated to the United States in the 1980s, and my dad was a veteran Marine from the Philippines. So interesting background for me. My mom, all of her siblings ended up living here or migrating to Virginia. So my mom has 8 siblings, and every weekend there was always a family party. So it was never lonely growing up. And then my educational background is my first degree was in history, and I never thought that I wanted to I grew up with nursing values for sure from my mother, but I was one of those stubborn Filipinos where that stereotype that Filipinos become nurses. I didn't want to be like one of just another stereotype, and so stubborn. Like I knew I liked healthcare, but I kind of ignored nursing. So eventually, like as I matured, after going through more college years, I realized that nursing was the right profession for me because in terms of empathy and compassion, those are two traits that I value, and spending time with the patient and also the care environment where it's so broad, where it's not just bedside manner, it's also what are all these social forces that are affecting the health of the patient, and that goes so much broader, especially it's relevant with the study of history. So I got my bachelor's degree, and then I just graduated with my master's entry. So I'm a second degree nurse. So I got my master's in clinical nurse leadership in nursing, and then currently I'm getting my PhD in nursing. And this is all. I think it goes back to my upbringing with my parents. So can you hear me, Uncle?
Yep.
Okay. Yeah. So for me, it goes back to my upbringing with trying to deal with this acculturational mismatch between different for my culture as I guess growing up American, but also Filipino. At the same time, dealing with intergenerational differences between me and my parents. So trying to I guess blend those two worlds. It's very hard to I guess explain, but for both my parents, there's among their own families, they're considered the strictest among their siblings. So you can imagine what it was like for me and my sister growing up. They were very strict. So I guess for me, I internalized a lot of my own thoughts to try to explain, I guess, my identity, why am I like in the position where I am? Why are my parents, the way they are, and so forth and so forth. So history gave me a tool to try to, I guess, make sense of my own predicaments, but also a tool to practice mindfulness to just, I don't know, help, I guess, change my ways of thinking and, be more open-minded and such. And I think just growing up, I just loved history. I knew from the get-go, from grade school, history was my best subject. Like it wasn't math, it wasn't science like my parents wanted. It was history. And so you can imagine when I told them I was majoring in history for my first degree, they weren't very happy with that. But it's history's proven to be a very powerful tool, I think, and it's useful in almost any. To me, it's so useful in any profession where they're dealing with the social environment, social interactions, and making sure that there's no removing these power differentials between relationships. That was never the goal to begin with, but like my childhood dream was always to combine a career in healthcare and history. Was it to be a nurse historian? Specifically, no, but it turns out, that with this role, I get to do both, and I love what I do. So what happened was when I was looking into nursing programs, the only I looked into my alma mater at UVA first to see, like what do they have? And it's funny, like when I went on the website, just on the main page, it talked about a PhD nursing student who did her dissertation on did a dissertation using historical research. I was like, wow, I didn't know that nurses did historical research. I didn't even know that was a thing. But from there, then I found out UVA had a master's entry second degree nursing program. So I think I went in with that mindset, going that I wanted to be I was going to become a nurse historian. I was going to become a nurse and really learn the foundations of nursing, and then from there use critical theory to address larger, broader issues in healthcare beyond the bedside. And I think that's how I became a nurse historian. And everyone around me, like at the let me mention first too, like UVA is one of two. There's three academically associated nursing history centers in the world. So one of them is at UVA, which is, by chance, very lucky. And everyone at the Bioring Center for Nursing Historical Inquiry at UVA have been so nice and so supportive that it literally made my journey into nursing history so fluid and made me so confident and so sure that this is what I wanted to do.
Like what you hear so far? Make sure you never miss a show by clicking the subscribe button now. This podcast is made possible by listeners like you. Thank you for your support. Now back to the show.
I think this goes back to me trying to find my sense of identity. Everyone knows there's so many Filipino nurses, around the world, but I think that's part of the question I wanted to answer. But the main question is more so, I wanted to understand my life more. It's kind of selfish in a way, but I feel like the best kind of research stems from your own personal attachment to it. But I also wanted to understand, my mom, what are the social factors, what's historical factors that led her to where we are today? This is how, because she became a nurse, part of it is how I, came here to the United States. So there's so much going on with that. But in terms of the burning research question, though, I think it's developed a lot over time. So for right now, the main question I'd say is studying the social construction of race, or the dimension of nursing in the social construction of race, and then contextualized within the Filipino nurse diaspora. So seeing how political cultural identities have shaped, I guess, or how political cultural identities of Filipino nurses shaped over time. Because I've noticed in my research, particularly since I focus mainly in the United States, nurses during the first half of the 20th century, whenever they moved across the United States, they were treated differently. I think it's amazing that during that time, it was still the Jim Crow era, which I don't know if that's known around the world, but that during that period, it's when Black Americans were freed now, but there was a strict segregation, it's black and white. So when you see Filipino nurses, and other Asian migrants come into the United States, you see Filipinos weren't treated, great, even though they were nationals of the country. They were, since the Philippines was a territory of the United States after 1898. But then when Filipino nurses come, and it's odd that that they're allowed to easily work at white designated hospitals. So they're working alongside white nurses in terms of bedside and so forth. So that's mostly on the East Coast. As they move west, it changes a bit because there's more Asian migrants on the West Coast, but there's also less modernized hospitals on the West Coast. So then you see a more specific, I guess, you're kind of seeing Filipino nurses being pushed out of hospital jobs and more so into jobs that aren't really wanted by white nurses. So dealing with public health issues concerning Asian migrants, or really infectious diseases at sanitariums with tuberculosis. So it's interesting seeing that develop over time, and seeing when I did oral histories of Filipino nurses, in the second half of the 20th century, how there's still ongoing issues of race, and how Filipino nurses they serve sort of as a buffer between white and black nursing staff, and it's weird how they're treated across time. And so I guess in terms of the diaspora, the Filipino nurse diaspora, I think it'd be really interesting to, and I want to do this with my GIS research and also with help from Fines, but I would love to track historical trends, this diaspora throughout the decades, to see where the places that they're going and where they moving from location to location, and the more so of the domestic migration patterns that are happening. So once they're here once they're in a country, do they move around, or are they like just staying in that one area? Like it's usually never. I've noticed that most migrations aren't A to B. It's always A to C, B to C to B, and there's a lot of pathways along the way. So I think that's for sure my current research right now. Yeah. So nursing history has changed. So like history is always happening. So right now we're living through a time with COVID-19. A pandemic's happening right now, and a pandemic, like if you look at our history, it's happened like almost every 100 years. So the last one was the influenza of 1918. And I don't know what it was like in other countries besides the U.S. very well, but nurses were like the front, like back then, even now, nurses are the front line of defense against these pandemics. Because with these pandemics, there's no cure, there's no treatment for them yet, there's no vaccine that's already available. So who are the ones that are like tending to patients? Like in these cases, physicians aren't as useful as nurses because their job is to treat and to cure, but with nurses we're here to care for them. So it gives us a lesson in mobilizing our nursing workforce and how to proceed. But it seems like a lot of times we don't learn from history's past because we're still not ready even after 100 years. But in a lot of cases with nursing history, just so much has changed. I think I'm living history myself right now because like with my role as a clinical nurse leader, I don't know if you have that role. Do you have that role in Australia?
I'm not sure about it, actually.
Because I think it's rather new, because I know they introduced it into Japan and South Korea. But it's the first like new nursing role. It's the first new graduate nursing role in over 40 years, and it's the only advanced generalist. So it's like different from nurse practitioners, clinical nurse specialists, nurse anesthesists, and nurse midwives, where they all are technically advanced specialty. But for my master's role, it's a clinical role, but it's an advanced generalist. So it's interesting, like seeing it, trying to see that role integrated into the U.S. healthcare system right now, like, and comparing it to the history of other graduate nursing roles. It's always a struggle to integrate something new, because I think with nursing's history, it's always had a history of a struggle of professionalizing, for sure. It's always, the identity is being pulled in so many different directions, and it's also being controlled, a lot of times, like during the time it was developed, being pulled by like medicine, hospitals, and other government and other social forces. And it was hard for the profession to determine, what did it want to be. So seeing the clinical nurse leader role now, it's interesting to see how nursing leadership views things, and how is it seen among nurses practicing at the bedside. So nursing history, I think, is always changing. It's always fascinating, and it's always relevant for policy. So I'd say that my favorite thing is to be a nurse historian is that it combines everything that I love to do, but it's also just, it reminds me of how malleable, how flexible nursing is compared to, like other professions. Because you really, I think, emphasize the power of nursing as a nurse historian, because you, like, as a nurse, you start locally, kind of like at the bedside, at the microsystem, and then you keep going outwards and outwards and outwards. And so I'm at, like, I guess, with the way I'm looking at healthcare now, I'm looking more at systems, but across over time. And it's interesting to see, how things have changed. And I think the best part about being a nurse historian too is just how interdisciplinary it is, and how I'm able to combine so many different fields into this role. And I'm just always growing and learning, and it's just always an adventure. And I'm just always around the most supportive people. So for sure, I guess I'm gonna just start with Dr. Catherine Choi, since her book Empire of Care is literally like the first historical book on Filipino nurses, and it lays the groundwork for what I've done, and I'm so grateful for her for writing that book, and I don't know, putting more light on this diaspora, this post-colonial relationship between the U.S. and the uh, Philippines. But aside from her, I would say for sure, my current PhD advisor, Dr. Barbara Manwal, she's the director of the Fioring Nursing History Center, Fioring Center for Nursing Historical Inquiry, and she's just been so supportive of my research, of cultivating me as a nurse historian, and of just my growth as a nurse in general, for like over 3 years. And I'm so lucky to have her even now for my master's to now my PhD as a supportive advisor in my work. And her work is just so pivotal. I think her research talks about the professionalization of nursing through the viewpoint of Catholic nuns, which it makes a lot of sense that a lot of the professional nursing model, is based off of Catholic nuns, and also like how how I guess I try to make my work cover with nursing history, it's able to cover multiple fields or multiple topics. She also is the editor in chief of Healthcare and Disaster Nursing, and I think that magazine's based out of Japan. So she's truly her work addresses transnationalism, and she's taught me more and more about using critical theory and challenging narratives of whiteness. So she's really influenced my work, and I would say those are the two historians at the top of my mind right now Dr. Walligan for sure, but I won't talk about her again. I would say Tita Araceli Marcial. She's actually she's the first oral history that I conducted, and she was a Filipino nurse that arrived in the United States through the exchange visitor program during the 1961. So, and it's interesting just being around her, like we're over 60 years apart, and yet we're actually a lot similar. And just hearing about her experiences, as a nurse during that time, it's like, wow, like how, like, I don't know how these nurses have done it before, like, spreading across the world, like without having family or friends, in those countries. It's kind of terrifying to imagine how brave these nurses were. So it's always an honor to be in their presence. I have to say also another mentor would just be my mom for sure. I'm so proud of her work as a nurse, and even though she doesn't understand what I do as a nurse historian, she for sure is a great bedside nurse, and I'm so proud to have learned from her the values of nursing. Other people that have been mentors, I've met them across my time doing research where these were Filipino. These are also second generation Filipino Americans, but they were born in the United States during the 1930s. So you can imagine what it's like to be a person of color during the 1930s. And so I've learned so much from Dorothy Cordova, Tita Dorothy Cordova, who she founded along with her and her husband, Fred Cordova, they founded the Filipino American Historical National Society. So their archives is based in Seattle. And then Uncle Albert Asina, where he just recently passed away in October, he was a great help in my research in uncovering the early history of Filipino nurses. His mom came to the United States, to Cleveland, Ohio in 1926. So you can imagine there's a lot we talked about, and I had a lot in common with him too. And he was 87, I believe, when he passed away. So me and him were exactly 60 years apart. So it was just interesting to see, through my work, and the process of just doing research, I was already bridging generational and cultural gaps just by meeting these other Filipinos. Never in my mind, would I think wow, I have so much in common with them, but we actually did have so much in common. And it's crazy that, that I can just call upon them and they're always there to help. And yeah, those are my mentors.
Maraming salamat sa iyo.
Well, that's all for today's episode of Pinoy RN. Thanks for listening, and thank you to our guest for joining me today. Join us again next time when we talk about Filipino nurses and nursing. Make sure you subscribe to the Pinoy RN podcast on YouTube so you never miss an episode. Also follow us on Facebook at Pinoy RN Podcast. Special thanks to our event partners, Beta Nu Delta Nursing Society, Filipino Nursing Diaspora Network, Nursing for Humanity.